Now, a story that has got a lot of traction in the UK, but not nearly enough traction here in Australia, is to do with the World Health Organization. Now, you will have seen various scare stories about, oh, there's a new pandemic coming, the next one's going to be worse, this sort of stuff. You will have read about that. What you won't have read much about is how the World Health Organization, I've warned you about this many, many times before on this show, are desperate to have some kind of global pandemic treaty whereby it would be the World Health Organization who says to separate countries, now there's dispute about what powers they would have, and Scott Morrison said, oh, no, don't worry, it would never get this bad. But at its worst, the reality is, or the fear is, that the World Health Organization will have the powers to be able to say such and such a state or such and such a nation or country or whatever is in a pandemic situation and must be locked down, even if that entity says, no, we're not, or disputes it. That's the fear of how bad it could be. There's dispute about whether that's what the agenda will be. But in the UK, MPs within the government are now getting very twitchy about what they see as the World Health Organization taking powers on a global scale to impose pandemics at will. This is a really serious story, and it will only stop if Australian voters speak up very loudly and very clearly on chat shows and radio shows and so on, saying we do not want a World Health Organization global pandemic treaty.
And
James.
Rowan, I think the thing here, you were right to couch this in an awful lot of sort of cautious language because, of course, there can be extremism. But there's also, a saying that goes around that says, today's conspiracy theories are tomorrow's coming attractions. One of the things that really needs to be noted about the pandemic, too, is that so many of the jurisdictions that did best are the ones that did not follow the official narrative, the official advice. I'm thinking of Florida. I'm thinking of Sweden. So the idea that you would have this sort of, called you don't want to say world government because that would be all conspiracy theory, but this world body telling governments how to manage their pandemics, when in fact that world body fell and tumbled for the Wuhan model of containment and eradication, causing untold misery around the globe, I think people should be very, very wary about.
Absolutely. And remember, they started off by repeating the Beijing propaganda that this wasn't even going to be transmittable between people. That was the first untruth that they came out with. And then from then was just this CCP model of lockdowns will cure you of this virus. We're going to eradicate a virus, which we knew from day one almost was going to be endemic. So it was completely false. But I do challenge both of you on the notion that Australians will fight against this and Australians don't.
I didn't say that.
Well,
I didn't say that.
Rowan,
I'm saying they should fight against it.
Because
I know what you're going to say.
As we saw, this was very confronting for me. This was seeing the country and people, as I never imagined I would, absolutely embracing these illiberal, cruel policies, whether it was playground bans, IVF bans, bans on seeing your dying family members, curfews. Every insane bit of overreach had enormous public support.
Particularly in Victoria, but
there's also
everywhere. Yeah,
everywhere across the country, it had that enormous support. It didn't matter how irrational it was, how cruel it was. The majority wanted it and cheered it on. So I wonder whether there is actually
You're right to raise that question, and that's why we need to point out, it's our job to point out how threatening and dangerous this is. We'll be talking to Dr. Aseem Malhotra later in the show. Make sure you watch that. He's got questions around vaccines. But the question of let me just make the point about the global pandemic. We raised this on this program last year at the time of the election. Just before the election, the Spectator Australia ran an exclusive saying that the Morrison government was going to sign up to the global pandemic treaty. Every May, the World Health Organization gets together. They all sit round. We send people over there. They all sit round, sign bits of paper. We've got no idea what they're signing us up to. Morrison came out and said, absolutely, that's nonsense. The story's not true. It'll never happen. It'll never happen. The reality is the Australian government, whether it's Morrison or Albanese or anyone else, sends bureaucrats over to these meetings. They all sit round. We don't know what they sign us up to. And the fear is, and James is right, I do couch it because we've got to know. We don't know. That's the problem. We don't know what they are signing us up to. And the reality is the World Health Organization have made it crystal clear, James, that they want that ability to have a global pandemic treaty.
Well, and the thing here that underlies this and so many things that we need to be vigilant about and what people need to be vigilant about, but they get called conspiracy theorists and whack jobs and things like that. The fundamental idea behind all of this is this idea that freedom is somehow the problem. And this is the issue with so many of the issues that we face, whether it's the pandemic, whether it's the climate crisis, if you want to say that in quotes, whatever the issue is. People having too much freedom is the thing that annoys the regulators. And we're going to see this. We saw the Climate Council this week come out and say that, well, to fight the climate thing, not only do we need to all move to EVs, but we need to own half as many cars and take half as many car trips. We need to take trips according to the public transport schedule. We see this on level after level after level, and this is what people need to be really vigilant about. It is not freedom that is the problem. It is always the people who want to take your freedom away.
And we're now in a world where really it's not left versus right, it's authoritarianism versus freedom, as James says, or the collective, the greater good, versus freedom of the individual to make their own choices. And what we saw during COVID, which is why we must have a royal commission, as Rita was saying, to find out what actually happened during COVID.
Hear, hear.
We must have that royal commission into what actually happened and what did happen to our freedoms and at what cost they came.